My wife took off her ring, declaring, "I'm going to find someone who appreciates my free spirit." I nodded. Then I hired a PI who documented her free-spirited encounters with multiple men. I presented this at our divorce mediation when she demanded spousal support. She got pennies. She was frantically calling her lawyer. I, 34M, thought I knew my wife until she declared her independence. What I discovered next changed everything. My wife took off her wedding ring on a Tuesday morning, the metal making a soft clink as it hit our kitchen counter. She stood there in her yoga pants and oversized sweater, looking at me with this defiant expression I'd never seen before. She told me she was done with our marriage, that she needed to find someone who truly appreciated her free spirit. She said I was suffocating her creativity and that she deserved better than what I could offer. I just nodded, not because I agreed, but because after 8 years of marriage, I learned that arguing with her when she was in one of these moods was pointless. She'd made similar declarations before, about needing space, about feeling trapped, about how I didn't understand her artistic soul. But this time felt different. This time, she actually took off the ring. She told me she wasn't moving out immediately, but that she needed time to figure things out. She said she'd be staying late at her art studio more often, exploring new connections, and discovering who she really was without the constraints of marriage. She made it sound like some sort of spiritual journey. I watched her grab her purse and head out, presumably to her studio downtown. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. Our house, which had always been filled with her dramatic proclamations and artistic chaos, suddenly felt hollow. That evening, I sat in my home office staring at my laptop screen. My wife had posted on social media about embracing new chapters and living authentically. The comments from her artist friends were predictably supportive, full of fire emojis and declarations about following your bliss. I closed the laptop and made a decision that would change both our lives. The next morning, I contacted Marcus Chun, a private investigator I'd found through a colleague's recommendation. Marcus had handled several divorce cases and came highly recommended for his discretion and thoroughness. When I met him at his office, I explained the situation plainly. My wife had essentially announced her intention to explore other relationships while still married to me. I needed documentation of whatever she was about to do. Marcus was professional and straightforward. He explained his rates, the legal boundaries of surveillance, and what kind of evidence would be admissible in court. I signed the contract that afternoon. Meanwhile, at home, my wife continued her new routine. She'd leave early for her studio and return late, often smelling like wine and cigarettes. She'd become increasingly secretive with her phone, taking it everywhere, including the bathroom. When I asked about her day, she'd give vague answers about networking events and gallery openings. Marcus began his surveillance the following week. His first report arrived via encrypted email 3 days later, and it was already more than I'd expected. My wife wasn't just spending time at her art studio. She was frequenting upscale bars in the arts district, often accompanied by different men. The photos showed her laughing, drinking, and engaging in what could only be described as intimate conversations with various companions. The documentation continued for weeks. Marcus was thorough, maintaining detailed logs of her activities with timestamps and locations. The evidence painted a clear picture of someone actively pursuing multiple romantic relationships while still legally married and living in our shared home. During this time, my wife's behavior at home became increasingly erratic. She'd alternate between guilt-ridden attempts at normal conversation and aggressive defensiveness about her need for independence. She started talking about how marriage was an outdated institution and how she was rediscovering her true self. She mentioned meeting fascinating people who understood her artistic vision in ways I apparently never could. One evening, she brought up the topic of divorce more seriously. She said she'd been thinking about our future and had consulted with a lawyer about her options. She explained that she'd contributed significantly to our household and deserved fair compensation for the years she'd supported my career while pursuing her art. She mentioned spousal support as something her lawyer suggested she'd likely be entitled to, given that I earned considerably more than she did from her sporadic art sales. I listened without comment, continuing to gather information through Marcus while maintaining the facade of a husband coming to terms with his wife's new reality. Marcus's reports revealed the extent of my wife's free-spirited exploration. She'd developed regular patterns with at least 4 different men. There was the gallery owner who took her to expensive restaurants, the musician who she'd met at a coffee shop, the businessman from her yoga class, and the younger artist from her studio collective. The surveillance showed overnight stays, intimate dinners, and behavior that left no doubt about the nature of these relationships. The most damaging evidence came when Marcus documented a weekend trip she'd taken to a nearby resort with one of her new companions. She'd told me she was attending an art retreat, but the photos and timeline clearly showed otherwise. The evidence package was growing substantial. After 2 months of documentation, I decided it was time to proceed with divorce proceedings. I contacted my own attorney, a sharp woman who specialized in high-asset divorces. When I presented her with Marcus's evidence file, her eyebrows raised significantly. She explained that this level of documentation would substantially impact any spousal support negotiations. I filed for divorce the following week. My wife's reaction was surprisingly calm initially. She said she'd expected this and that it was probably for the best. She reiterated her belief that she deserved fair financial compensation and that her lawyer was confident about her prospects. Her confidence lasted until the mediation session 6 weeks later. The mediation took place in a sterile conference room downtown. My wife arrived with her attorney, a middle-aged man who seemed to specialize in representing artists in divorce proceedings. She wore a flowing dress and multiple pieces of handmade jewelry, playing up the artistic persona she'd cultivated. Her lawyer opened with demands for substantial spousal support, citing her contributions to our marriage and her limited earning capacity as an artist. He argued that she'd sacrificed career advancement to support our relationship and deserved ongoing financial support to maintain her lifestyle while transitioning to independence. My attorney listened politely, then opened her briefcase. She placed several manila folders on the table and began methodically presenting Marcus's documentation. The timeline of my wife's activities over the past months was laid out in precise detail, complete with photographs, location data, and witness statements. My wife's face went through several changes as the evidence was presented. Initial confusion gave way to recognition, then to barely contained panic. Her lawyer's confident demeanor cracked as he realized the scope of what he was seeing. The documentation showed not just infidelity, but a pattern of deliberate deception while my wife continued to live in our marital home and benefit from our shared finances. There were credit card receipts for dinners with her various companions, hotel charges, and even evidence that she'd used our joint account to fund some of her romantic pursuits. My attorney explained that under state law, this evidence of adultery and financial misconduct would significantly impact any spousal support determination. The judge would likely view my wife's behavior as grounds for minimal or no ongoing support. My wife tried to argue that her exploration of other relationships had occurred after she'd mentally ended our marriage, but the timeline clearly showed otherwise. She'd been pursuing these relationships while still presenting herself as a committed wife seeking space rather than someone who had already moved on to multiple other partners. The mediation took an unexpected turn when my wife's lawyer requested a private consultation with his client. They stepped outside for nearly an hour. When they returned, my wife looked defeated. Her lawyer had apparently explained the legal reality of their situation. The final settlement reflected the strength of the evidence against her. Instead of the substantial spousal support she'd initially demanded, my wife received minimal temporary support for 6 months and a small portion of our shared assets. The house, the primary savings, and my retirement accounts remained largely intact. Update 2. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I heard from a mutual friend that my wife had left the city entirely. Her art career never gained the momentum she'd expected, and her reputation in our local arts community had suffered after word spread about the circumstances of our divorce. She posted something on social media about starting fresh in a new place where she could truly be herself. The post received few likes and fewer supportive comments than her previous declarations about free spirits and authentic living. Marcus, the private investigator, sent me a final invoice along with a note saying this had been one of the most thoroughly documented infidelity cases he'd handled. He mentioned that the evidence package had set a new standard for his firm in terms of comprehensive surveillance documentation. Update 3. A year later, I was contacted by my wife's former lawyer. He was facing a malpractice claim from my ex-wife, who blamed him for not properly preparing her for the mediation. He wanted to confirm details about the evidence timeline for his own protection. I referred him to my attorney and Marcus, who could provide all the professional documentation he needed. The irony wasn't lost on me that my wife's declaration about finding someone who appreciated her free spirit had led to her losing everything she'd actually valued. Her pursuit of multiple relationships had cost her the financial security she'd demanded, the artistic community she'd cultivated, and the stable home base she'd taken for granted. I kept Marcus's business card, not because I expected to need surveillance services again, but as a reminder that sometimes the best response to dramatic declarations is simply to nod and let people document their own choices. The house feels peaceful now. I've redecorated, removing the chaotic artistic touches my wife had insisted upon. My finances are stable, my stress levels have decreased, and I've learned valuable lessons about recognizing when someone's actions don't match their proclaimed values. Sometimes I wonder if my wife ever found what she was looking for when she declared her need to explore her free spirit. Based on everything that followed, I suspect she discovered that freedom without responsibility often leads to consequences that are far more constraining than the commitments she'd chosen to abandon. The wedding ring she'd dramatically removed from our kitchen counter that Tuesday morning had been worth about $3,000. In the end, that symbolic gesture of independence had cost her significantly more than she'd ever calculated.